land is your domain.
They loved their house on the hill. It was kind of like their own little kingdom.
You protect it the way you protect your life.
I would call it a feud. Everything that the other did angered his neighbor.
It can happen anywhere, to anybody.
You fight for it. And sometimes you kill for it. People search their whole lives to find a place like this.
It's rural, very, very attractive area. Nice homes of professional people.
Carmel Valley is very close-knit. People know each other there because it is so small.
Our town is special, but if you're really lucky, you get to live up in the hills.
It was pretty spectacular, the views from Carmel Valley. It was very, very beautiful.
Mel Grimes moved up here in 1988. He's an avid surfer, a marathon runner.
Mel was just a really nice guy, always happy, never had anything negative to say about anybody.
Just a really fun guy to hang out with. But at the same time, just really mellow. He just kind of did his own thing, and I really dug him.
The Good Time fitness buff is also a tough first-class defense lawyer.
He was very highly regarded in our community. He was very able. He was a strong litigator, a worthy adversary.
Give him a break. He deserves a break.
Years ago, Mel found his soulmate in his wife, Elizabeth.
Honey! Oh.
My mom was a nurse. She was working at the office next door to his. He asked her out on a date one day. My mom said yes, and then from that point on, it was just they really were into each other.
I always found her to be an extremely generous person. She just took Mel's friends in like we were family. We just sit down on the floor and listen to music and talk about old times, and it was just great. It was really comfortable and fun.
Honey?
They were inseparable. I would almost say that out of any couple that I know, I think they were perfectly right with each other.
They'd both been divorced. This time was going to be different. Elizabeth moved into Mel's house on the hill, and they got married in 1995. The Grimes were all set to live happily ever after. But conflict can change people. For the worse. In 1999, someone new moves into the place next door. They don't come more impressive than John Kenny. Korean War veteran, a doctorate from MIT. He travels the world as a high-level consultant with the oil industry. Friends call him Jack.
Jack was extremely clever and very well read, and he was blessed with an almost perfect memory. So, if you wanted to take him on in an argument, you better have all your facts. He wasn't really interested in a half-baked opinion. In company, he was very polite and friendly, especially towards women. He had this old-world patrician manner to him. He would stand up when a woman came into the room, for example.
John's wife is a doctor in France. Their respective careers keep him apart from her and their 2 adoptive daughters for months at a time.
He lived alone in the house.
At first glance, our neighbors didn't have much in common.
Hi, I'm Mel Grimes.
Still, they hit it
My
off.
wife Elizabeth.
They were definitely friends. They would hang out and talk on the driveway. They were very neighborly.
There were times when he'd given Mrs. Grimes the key to his house because he was away for long periods.
We were happy to see the 2 neighbors getting along so well. And John was a welcome addition to the community.
He went to Bible study with this group in Carmel Valley.
I went with him on a couple of occasions just out of interest. And there were 5 or 6 people around a table discussing the Bible. I could see how well respected Jack was in this group. He was very polite and they were all polite to him and they obviously held him in high regard.
As John settles in, the friendship grows.
Good dog. You enjoying that, eh?
The Grimes dog would go over to the Kenny property.
He would feed him and hang out with him.
John! John, how are you?
Oh, fine. How are you?
For a while, there is peace in the valley. But sharp differences begin to surface.
Everything was neat and tidy around his house. He was an elderly gentleman. He didn't have a lot of stuff, so his yard wasn't cluttered.
My parents' house was definitely a little bit more, gosh, how could you say, decorated their own way. It was funky. It was almost like a little antique roadshow kind of garage. You would go in there and you would find the coolest things. And he would pick up random stuff from, you know, antique shops or vinyl records. I mean, my gosh, 50,000 vinyl albums in that house. My parents collected the weirdest stuff. But the thing was no one could see it except for him. And then you look down at his house and it was just, everything was perfect.
As the months go by, John's need for order begins to assert itself.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. Say, where'd you get those plants? They're not aggressive, are they? I mean, I don't want them growing over in my property.
Slowly but surely, living side by side starts feeling way too close for comfort.
Hello. Well, you get your dog digging a hole in my lawn here, nothing more than that.
That's not so bad.
Yeah, well, I gotta fix it.
They were such different people.
You take your dog home.
The dog may be annoying, but the Grimes and John Kenny still need to get along. After all, they share the same private driveway.
These kind of common driveways shared by multiple homes is very, very, very typical throughout Monterey County.
The shared road leads to 2 carports. One for the Grimes, one for Kenny. Space is tight. They have to drive over each other's property to get into their carports. No big deal, at least in the beginning. The real problem is the small wooden bridge that crosses a creek at the bottom of their hill. The Grimes and Kenny drive over that bridge every day to reach their homes, and it needs work.
Damn.
It was old, it was falling apart. They wanted to tackle it before it just collapsed and then no one could get across.
Jack said to the Grimes, we need to get this bridge repaired. And Grimes said, I'll do it. And Jack said, what do you mean you'll do it? Mr. Grimes said, well, I'll repair it. It'll be much cheaper. We won't have to pay a contractor.
I mean, this is dangerous. You gotta...
Mel had a lot of clients that owed him, money and couldn't pay, but they could pay in labor.
Oh, here you are.
Yeah, I got the whalers for you.
That's how Mel took care of it. He just, all right, build a deck or do some yard work or, do some landscaping or help me move this or that.
But John Kenny doesn't want to cut corners on this bridge. It has to be built to code. Otherwise, vehicles could crash through it and end up in the creek.
So Jack went back to Grimes and said, we have to do this officially. And Grimes gave him the cold shoulder treatment.
John goes along, but apparently he gets tired of waiting for Mel to get the job done.
Kenny took it upon himself to have an engineer come out,
Good. Yeah. So, the whole thing, gone.
draw up the plans, get it going. He did all of this on his own, had the work done, then basically handed a bill to my parents.
There you go.
Well, mister.
And my parents they didn't agree to that.
And I could have got it done for half the price. I ain't gonna pay a penny.
Life on the hill is starting to get nasty, and it's not going to stop.
It got ugly.
Their little piece of paradise was being torn asunder.
I think that they each felt a mutual provocation. It just seemed to kind of snowball.
Mel and Elizabeth Grimes are arguing with their neighbor John Kenny about a big bill. John rebuilt a bridge they both use, and he wants the Grimes to pay their share.
Pay half of it, we go to court.
Kenny sued my parents for the portion that Kenny believed that they should have to pay for.
There was no doubt in Jack's mind that he was entitled to recover this money from Grimes.
The court rules in John's favor. Now, things are going to escalate.
I'll never forget my mom calling me in Santa Barbara going, Mel's pissed. Mel he's really fired up about this. And that's when things really started getting bad.
At the same time, someone else on the hill runs into problems with the Grimes. Neighbor Stephen Young says they've been using his land as an illegal dump site.
There were refrigerators in there with leaking refrigerant. There were oil cans leaking oil. And there's also a requirement in California that you can't take invasive weeds off one property and dump them on another. The Grimes, they don't care about the impact on other people. They chose to dump the stuff and all this waste on our land.
Things don't go well when Youngs asks the Grimes to get rid of the junk.
The atmosphere turned very frosty very quickly, and Mr. Grimes adopted a very strange attitude.
Just like with the bridge, nothing happens. Youngs lays a formal complaint with environmental authorities, and the Grimes eventually comply with a cleanup order. Mostly.
In fact, he didn't get rid of it all. He left a lot of it on our land. He took away all the waste that was on his land, but managed to leave strategic bits on my land to punish me, you see. This was his idea. He didn't have to comply fully with the law. He could just do enough.
Doing just enough is no longer acceptable to the Grimes' closest neighbor. John Kenny finally gets fed up with their dog running wild through his manicured world.
Mr. Kinney complained that it would come over and mess on his property. I think that he even claimed that Mel and Elizabeth gathered dog refuse and threw it on his property.
They were forcing their dogs onto his land and onto my land to defecate. Completely unnecessary.
The dog used to go down to the house when everything was good with John, and he would feed him. So, any dog, you feed a dog, it's gonna come back.
Get off my property!
Get your hands off
Yeah,
my
you
dog.
don't shit on my lawn
He
here!
called animal control patrol. Animal patrol would come up and be like, hey, your dog needs to be on a leash. They can't go over here. You know, they got to keep them on your property.
Dog. All right, get back in there.
That really drove my mom nuts.
Our neighbor looks at the Grimes and sees chaos. But maybe the issue is his obsession with order.
I'd almost say insane, just how organized it was. I'll never forget, like, just looking at even, like, his wood pile. It was just like, whoa, this guy is, like, you know, he's got stages of wood piled up here, you know, by size.
Order and chaos clash again. This time, over the shared driveway.
Because of how the driveway was set up, you would have to back down my parents' driveway and then back up his to go back down the rest of the driveway. And, you know, I had been doing that before he had moved in and was never an issue.
Kenny decided, as this dispute escalated, this feud, to really draw a line in the dirt. He wanted to assert what he believed to be his property rights.
Really well.
Hey, don't want you guys driving this property line here, okay?
Why?
What are you talking about?
Oh, come on.
And he's like, that's my piece of dirt. You can't back your van out over that.
You haven't done your research. This is my property and I don't want you driving on it.
You have to understand, this piece of property was like the size of a surfboard. It was very tiny.
Why don't you talk to me like that again?
Surveyors are brought in to mark out property lines. But that doesn't bring any peace to the hill.
And then it started to get worse. I would get phone calls from my mom, you know, upset, just not herself, voice sounds different, stressful.
The Grimes respond in their own way.
They had no trespassing signs made up, and they stuck them on every post on the fence line that was between Jack's land and their land. Now, it only faced Jack's property. This is directly in Jack's face, no trespassing. Which is a bizarre thing to do. This has to be a very aggressive person.
Mr. Kenny felt that they were provoking him.
He has no rhythm at all.
They would blare music. They would set speakers up in their front garden and blare music out, heavy rock music. Now, they're entitled to play music, but on and on and on, you begin to wonder, well, is this an aggravation or not?
I was right there.
The escalating conflict gets increasingly personal.
My mom had a meditation room built, and that thing was built without permits. The carport was built without permits. And once John Kenny started figuring out these structures were built illegally, then he started to turn my parents in to the county on those things. The whole neighborhood had illegal structures, you know, and he was strictly just focusing on my parents. He could have gone up and down that street and just been boom, 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 but it was all focused on them, and it was very upsetting to my mom and to Mel.
My name is Dr. John Franklin Kenny. I'm the nearest neighbor to Mr. Grimes. When a neighbor puts up some structure which damages your property or damages your enjoyment of it, when you come before the planning commission, excuse me, this is illegal, it's unpermitted, deny it.
If Elizabeth can't enjoy her private retreat, the Grimes make sure John won't enjoy his either.
They reported him for a kind of a gazebo or a glass pertinence to the back of his house that he used, and apparently he built that without a permit.
Mrs. Grimes, I thought we had an understanding. Get those plants off my property.
I don't think their home felt like home anymore. I think they were too fearful of Mr. Kinney.
I think they had an objective to get rid of him. I think they wanted him out of that house and to give up and move away.
And in this war, anything goes.
He was out of control. He was red in the face and he was extremely angry. California's a weird place, and there are weird people everywhere. And you never know what your neighbor is underneath the surface.
This should have been paradise by the sea. But for some of our neighbors, Carmel Valley is turning into a living hell.
You had a problem to keep the door off.
It was gonna be paid for. And now you
Mel Grimes would never back down to a bully. He was quite a guy, strong-willed, in my view, fearless.
The Grimes were bullies to anyone that opposed them. And, you know, some people you can bully and they'll back down and they'll be intimidated, but Jack wasn't that sort of a person. If you bullied him, it would make him more determined to stand up.
But was he someone who would break into a neighbor's house to scare them?
One of their pets was poisoned. A likely source was, at least in their mind, Mr. Kenny. He knew they both worked and were gone all day long, and the house was empty and never locked.
It's just ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. Out in that countryside, if you've got cats and they roam around, they're more than likely going to be killed. There are cougars out there are skunks, there are all sorts of things that eat cats. There was a claim that $10,000 had been taken out of the Grimes' property. They made the suggestion that he killed their cats and stole this money.
Mrs. Grimes was concerned that Mr. Kenny was not only an odd, weird person, but was also dangerous.
I remember telling my mom and Mel just one day, I'm like, you know, why don't you guys move? But it was like, no, we were here first. They had no intentions of ever moving. And they were really adamant about staying.
What makes everything so complicated is the shared driveway. Mel Grimes decides to cement over a small part of it he claims is communal. John Kenny contends it isn't.
In his scientific view of the law said that that little spit of land was his land and nobody else was supposed to touch it. And he expected and demanded that he was right.
Like the battle over the bridge, this one doesn't go Mel's way either. The cement pad can't stay.
I see Mr. Grimes thumping this piece of concrete with his sledgehammer. And he was out of control. He was red in the face and he was extremely angry.
Each dispute escalated into the next one. And each time that escalation happened, the feelings got harder and harder.
But there is no backing down for either of our neighbors.
he needed to be in control of the situation. And I think that if he didn't want Mel and Elizabeth driving across this little sliver of land, that they should listen to him. It was his property in his mind.
In his mind, these people were trampling on his rights, his property rights, and that was not to be tolerated, and not something that he would tolerate.
After winning the cement pad battle, Kenny returns to the bigger campaign over property lines on the shared driveway.
He planted a garden on this dirt patch, and the dirt patch is, it's about 10 feet long and, a few feet wide. Planted this garden to stake out his right to this patch.
This garden stops the Grimes from getting into their carport, or so John thinks.
Mel knew the law. He knew that you couldn't place something there to block Kenny from getting out of his driveway, and vice versa.
Mel came home one day and saw the little garden there, and it blocked his access to his carport, and he just drove his car right over it and actually backed up and forth.
Totally destroying it. Proof again to Kenny that the Grimes could do whatever they wanted.
And Mr. Kenny came down the driveway in his car and was taking photographs of Mel.
My mom lunged at him to pull the camera away from him.
There was a camera strap that was around Kenny's neck. And I pulled Kenny's head into the door jamb of the vehicle.
Elizabeth yanked the camera away from him with enough force that it actually broke the camera strap, according to Mr. Kenny.
When I took Kenny to the hospital, he looked like a 90-year-old man. He really did. He looked a wreck. He was frightened of everyone. It was disgraceful that someone should do this to this old man. To abuse him in this way, to bully him, and then to attack him in this way, and to break the lanyard of a camera. I mean, this is nylon. Must have been huge force. And, Jack said they tried to kill me. That's right, those were his words, they tried to kill me.
My mom, on her best day in heels, was maybe 5 feet tall, and this guy was well over 6 feet. I mean, it just seemed weird. It didn't seem like it added up. It was like, you did that, Mom? There's no way. And she's like, yeah, he's full of it.
Yeah, take it out! I don't care!
It really just changed her whole perspective on the outlook of life and other people. It upset her. She would cry. She just didn't feel, she felt imprisoned in her own home.
Some of us felt bad for John Kenny. Some of us felt just as bad for what the Grimes were going through. And none of us could imagine what was to come.
My mom went from my whole life telling me that, people are good, trust people, to people are evil, people are bad, watch out for them. I had no idea that it would ever escalate to something like this.
You don't mess with. Never.
He knew that he was building this up in their lives up to a breaking point where they were going to snap.
In our quiet little town of Carmel Valley, California, a fight over property lines is rapidly spiraling out of control.
I just saw him shaking like this. I said, well, the police are going to come.
Both sides report the confrontation to the sheriff, but no charges are laid. A classic case of he said, she said.
Kenny wanted a filing on the Grimes for battery, but I know it did not get filed by our office.
Elizabeth knows where John goes to church, so she writes to his pastor.
Dear Pastor Hong, I am the lady who called you a couple of weeks ago. I asked you if you might be able to offer us some counseling or mediation.
John fires back.
I'm out of patience with your cowardly, gutter-mouth behavior.
I assume that this is not something Mr.
Behavior
Kenny
is unacceptable by any standards of civilized
that you
conduct.
continue to keep us in your prayers.
Nothing comes of the exchange, so Elizabeth takes the battle public.
My mom probably just got an idea in her head, like, hey, I'm gonna, church is a place where everybody gets together to get beyond things and work things out.
Prepared to know that it's going to happen.
John, we need to talk. The whole community knows what's going on. Look at us. Look at my finger. Look at your neck. Listen to me.
She did go there and interrupted a Bible study meeting. She asked for prayer for resolution, and according to Kenny, questioned his Christianity. How could he be at a Bible study class professing to be Christian when he was harassing her and her husband over such trivial things?
What kind of Christian are you that all you care about is your reputation?
It really upset Kenny because it put the spotlight on him at his place, and he didn't like that at all.
That's such an affront to a man in front of his friends and in a church. I mean, it was such an abuse of Jack, and I think that tore away the last shred of Jack's privacy. He thought to himself, I'm not safe anywhere.
And it looks like the Grimes feel the same way.
Mel was very mellow about it, but I knew that it bothered him inside. He knew how to handle the stress that well. He had always taken care of everyone else's problems, but for himself, he didn't really know how to, maintain his own stress. Finally, it had broke Mel. He developed an irregular heartbeat. Doctor's just like, your #1 killer right now is stress, and that's what's gonna give you a heart attack.
That's really, really bad. You have to help us. You have to do something. We can't.
About 2 weeks after the scene at church, we heard both sides ask for restraining orders.
Something's wrong with him.
I thought they were going to come over here, but they didn't.
When you file that kind of request in California, there is a box on the form and a requirement that states whether you have guns. Mr. Kenny checked off the box, again under penalty of perjury, that he had no gun. Mr. and Mrs. Grimes had an old gun, not a functioning gun, that I believe they were using as somewhat of a decoration in their home. But they did turn in an old, unused gun.
How can restraining orders bring peace of mind when you live so close and share so much?
You have to stay away from your neighbor. You're gonna pass them on the driveway. You're gonna see them at the mailbox. You're gonna bump into them.
But words on paper don't stop the Grimes from driving over the piece of property their neighbor says is his, and his alone. And John Kenny isn't backing down either.
It was Monday, January 29th, 2007. My mom was at that time working at a retirement home as a kind of a nurse aide in Carmel Valley. Mel was in Salinas doing his lawyer thing.
Unbeknownst to the Grimes, Mr. Kenny had a boulder delivered sometime during the day.
The boulder stakes out Kenny's property line and makes it near impossible for the Grimes to get into their carport.
They had met at a restaurant in Carmel Valley, but because they came separate, they drove home separate, and that must have been right around like the 5 o'clock time. Kenny knew that putting that rock there was going to get a reaction out of Mel, and he was going to blow a fuse. Drove up the driveway, and I would bet anything that as soon as Mel saw that rock, my mom just knew that he was going to lose it.
If this is what John Kenny wanted, he gets his wish.
I had no idea it would ever turn to that at all, not in a million years.
Yes, it's an emergency. 82 Hitchcock Canyon Road. Our neighbors blocked our driveway.
The boulder is the final straw for Mel Grimes.
Please send somebody right away. Okay, we're getting units started. Okay, where's the neighbor at? He's in his house. Please, where is he? No one touch it. Let the police come. Don't you do that, Mel. Then I'll look at his house.
The years of argument and allegations have all built to this moment. And it will end in tragedy.
Oh, you shut up! Get off my line! Don't get off the car. Please send someone. Hello? Hello?
What he said indicates to me an intentional, violent, horrible, murderous act.
On the night of January 29, 2007, gunshots ring out in the hills of Carmel Valley.
The 911 dispatched. Emergency responders got to the scene.
Outside the Grimes carport, they find two victims.
Mel Grimes was already deceased on the ground by the rock.
Like her husband, Elizabeth Grimes has been shot, but he's still alive.
Paramedics were attending to Elizabeth, and they asked her who had done this to her.
I gave her.
She was transported to a trauma center. Mr. Kenny was then taken into custody and arrested for homicide.
It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was at home, 8-week-old baby. My daughter was asleep. There was a knock on the door. And he's like, is your dad Mel? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, he's dead. And, I mean, as cold as that, he's just like, is your mom Elizabeth? And I'm like, yeah. And, well, she's dead too. And I fainted.
Unfortunately, she died en route to the hospital in the helicopter. She didn't make it.
I knew it was going bad. Did I know that my parents were going to get shot? No, not in a million years.
I was deeply shocked. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. How could this have got to this situation?
There was definitely a split in the community because the folks that went to John Kenny's church couldn't imagine that he would, at age 72, a man who'd never committed a crime in his life, there's no way he would have killed two people without reason.
John Kenny pleads not guilty. He claims he shot the Grimes in self-defense after Mel attacked him with a sledgehammer. But then the evidence reveals the truth of that awful night.
Ballistics and bullet trajectory showed what happened that day, and to see that Mr. Kenny's account of how Mel came at him with the sledgehammer or the shovel was not accurate.
During the struggle, Elizabeth was still on the phone with 911. Everything was recorded.
He's blocked the driveway with what? With a big, huge boulder?
We know that he came out of his house knowing that there'd be a confrontation. And we know that he walked down his driveway with a loaded .45 and had it concealed. He's pushing her, get out of here, moving her off the property. Mel sees this, and so Mel comes to her rescue. We hear Elizabeth say, we know that Mel's DNA was found on the site of the gun. And the only explanation for that the first thing Kenny did was strike Mel across the face with the gun. That knocked Mel back, and then Kenny proceeded to shoot him.
But the neighbor didn't stop there. He turned the gun on Elizabeth. The recording captured the last words she and Mel spoke.
Hello? Hello?
One of the bullets that struck Elizabeth Grimes was very singular in the path that it left. In order for it to have left this trajectory, her body needed to be positioned in a certain way. The shot came from above at a very steep angle, with the person having their arm up like this, as if they were trying to protect themselves.
The evidence is clear. Elizabeth Grimes was shot to death by John Kenny as she lay defenseless on the ground. Even more chilling are the words many contend can be heard on the 911 call, spoken by John as he stood over his victim.
And he said, "Welcome to hell, Elizabeth," and then shot her in the back. Didn't realize my mom had the phone with her, and she was on the phone with 911.
Hello? Hello?
And then he turned around and he walked back up to his house and he called 911 to report that he'd been battered by his neighbors. Didn't mention that he'd shot anybody.
The guy just had no remorse whatsoever. He felt it. It was self-defense and he had every right to do it.
They found Kenny guilty of the first-degree murder of Elizabeth Grimes, meaning it was done with premeditation and deliberation and the intent to kill, and the second-degree murder of Mel Grimes. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
For a guy that's so controlling to be in a 5x8 cell with 2 other people that probably didn't get past 3rd grade telling him how it's going to be. You know, that's the justice I was looking for, because that's just a living hell for John, you know, for someone who's a control freak like that.
Knowing Jack Kenny the way I knew him, and thinking that this man has to spend the rest of his days in jail, it's a tragedy that adds nothing.
Maybe the saddest piece of this whole story comes to light soon after the killings. It turns out Mel and Elizabeth had decided to move after all.
Hey, Mel and Elizabeth, great news! The house in Hawaii that you've had your eye on, it's available.
And when that real estate agent called me and said that, you know, I'd like to speak to Elizabeth, you know, the property that they're looking at is available, it caught me completely off guard. I was like, whoa, they were seriously gonna do it. I so wish my parents had moved. To find out that they were gonna move a little too late, it drives me nuts.
Those of us who watch this nightmare unfold are grateful for one small measure of consolation.
My focus with my parents was they got to say they love each other and they died together. And that helps me get through that moment. Having my daughter helps me get through to the next day to, you know, to be a good man, to be a good person for her.